Thank you so much. So thanks especially to Rajesh for requesting me to give this talk. And before I even start, I should say that yes, you will need more talks, and one I want to already suggest is by Suvrat on copyright matters. So we had a nice discussion at lunch on this, and I'll touch on it very briefly. But I think, first of all, he knows a lot more on this particular issue, and I think it's worth highlighting. Actually, we have sort of similar views on this issue, which is also interesting. Set a thief to catch a thief. So the other thing is, of course, this out of the various talks I'm giving, this is the subject on which really I'm not an expert, despite the fact people have called me an expert on plagiarism, whatever that means. So this cover picture is supposed to show you a little bit the feeling of conflict between the things you have to go through in order to get your paper published. And basically, there is always a trade-off in this ethics business between how well you advertise your own work, which is what everyone wants to do, and how much you steal credit from others, roughly, which also, in some ways, what everyone wants to do, but we are decent people and we don't really do it. Okay. So let me run through a few. It's a very, it's a very sketchy talk which will touch upon many subjects. But I think plagiarism I'll kind of give a little more time to than the others. And I'll also indicate where more details could be discussed in the future. So I want to start with a quote from a Nobel laureate. Can anyone tell me which Nobel laureate this is? So, truth comes as conqueror only to those who have lost the art of receiving it as friend. So, and then another quote by a different Nobel laureate, also in literature. And this one highlights the fact that really when it comes to truth, you have to trust yourself. But if you get in the habit of not listening to yourself, then you can run into grief. But so as Dylan says, if you want somebody you can trust yourself. And I think that's a very important highlight of this subject, that ethics has to come from within. It's not, despite the fact that I'm told some of you were brought here kicking and screaming, but, in the end, that may be just to wake you up a bit, but finally it has to come from inside. Okay, so what is ethics? Very broadly, the study of right action. And it's the root behind the law, but there are differences. The law is defined by a country. It's implemented by force, if necessary, as we know only too well if we read newspapers. In contrast, ethical guidelines are meant to grow from within, and they are implemented within a community or a profession. So right away, sometimes people ask, can you give an example of something which is unethical but legal, or which is illegal but ethical? So I'll give you my favorite story about something which is illegal but ethical. So some person is very afraid of being on a plane with a hijacker who's carrying a bomb. So he studies online very carefully to find out the probability that on a given flight, there would be a person carrying a bomb. And he finds that that probability is some 0.00 some percent. Now he carries a bomb on the plane, figuring that the probability of some 2 people carrying bombs on the plane is even smaller. So this is a famous joke. Right, but notice that this person is carrying the bomb not at all to explode it or to bring down the plane. There's no unethical plan in the person's mind. He would be very hard put to explain this to the security if they find the bomb. You see, that he's only doing it to minimize the probability of the plane actually coming down, which also is unsound mathematics, but even that might be easier to explain to the authorities. But just to say, everything that's illegal is not necessarily unethical. Also, of course, I am sure people know, things are illegal for some days and then they are legal for other days. For example, the United States in the last 3 weeks has had something being illegal some days and legal some days. Okay. City of Delhi last year in winter had some kind of driving being legal on some days and illegal on other days, odd and even. So you never really can tell what the laws will be. Ethics can be different. Okay. And of course, there are different types of codes. I think it's no surprise that ethical codes typically stem from some ancient or at least long ago thought processes and writings of thinkers, writers, and inevitably also of religious texts. And since there are different religions, there are bound to be different ethical codes. Although surprisingly, there are many similarities. So I'm just going to list a few. This is not my expertise, but I'll just list a few what are called ethical codes or sources. So ethical relativism, no principles are universally valid. Moral principles are relevant to cultural standards. Deontology is the approach which puts an emphasis on duty and moral rules and on justice, autonomy, and kind acts. Pragmatic ethics says that you can make your, now these are not all contradictory to each other. You can have some strand of all. Pragmatic ethics says norms, principles, and criteria, moral criteria can be made more objective as a result of inquiry. So you can actually, it's a science. You can improve it like you can improve particle physics or string theory by working more. Consequentialism, very interesting one. Actions are solely judged by their consequences. Okay. Now, if you hold this up to some of the political controversies that are raging, it gets very interesting. I think many people like to think of this, and many other people don't like this at all. Okay. So that's fine. I don't want to give my opinion, but this is a contrast. They are contrasting views. Virtue ethics internalizes moral behavior and also emphasizes achieving excellence. So I think this might have a little bit to do with the discussion Surat and I had at lunch today, because achieving excellence is not obviously a subject of ethics. Is it unethical to be a lazy second-rate scientist? I mean, I don't know. I probably would be in trouble if it was. But virtue ethics, says that your ethics must be part of your drive to be better. And finally, divine command theory. This is used in India. All moral standards depend on God, or in this place on Rajesh. And well, it's again, there are in the case of God, sometimes there can be dispute what God thinks. But say in Indian institutions, often it's just whatever the director says, that's ethics, and otherwise it's not. So these are different approaches. Now, I want to highlight what Wikipedia tells us. The answer in an ethical decision is almost never yes or no, right or wrong. It's a very gray subject. It doesn't have any satisfying theorems or unique answers or anything. And one purpose of this talk, which I've tried to give in some form in many places, is just to make you appreciate that ethics is complex, just as science is complex. So when people ask you, summarize algebraic geometry in one line, or more commonly, string theorists say, can you explain phenomenology this weekend to me? So that, you realize that it's not a matter of one line or one weekend, and ethics is also like that. There's a lot you can learn by reading lots of different sources. And the questions are quite subtle. Okay. Now, of course, we don't have to bother with all of ethics. We only have to bother with academic ethics, at least for this discussion. And this is a statement about the standards of a professional community, in this case, scientists or physicists or, whatever, scientists in general, or, just academics in various subjects, working in various fields. And mostly people work in institutions. So each academic institution has its own principles of ethics, which usually is written in some document or something, but also its own practice. And it's often the case that the principles say one thing and the practice says another. So practice is very important. The practice is only seen in the actions of the whole community, and it sets a kind of level of how much we trust that institute. So it's extremely important. However, I think the principles are also important. So something written is useful. Again, sorry, Subrat, the whole of lunch is going to be quoted one by one. But this is a story I told him at lunch, that a certain eminent person in India accused of plagiarism, when there was a demand for action to be taken, the authorities said, but where does it say in the service rules that you're not allowed to plagiarize? So they couldn't find anything on which they could nail this person. Plagiarism was found, accepted, proved, but it wasn't possible to prove that this is a ground to sack or punish a person. And actually, in India, it's very difficult to punish a person for plagiarism unless the institute does it. Okay? To my knowledge, only one academy, the Indian Academy of Sciences in Bangalore, has a document which also prescribes how to address ethical violations by fellows of that academy. That's a small number of people, and that's pretty much, and a few institutions, TIFR has one, I assume it applies here. I don't know if you've said that formally, but it presumably does. And ICER has one. And that's about it. There are not many ethics documents of Indian institutions. And even if there are, it's not obvious what to do if there is a problem or if you find someone doing something wrong. Now, journals set their own ethical standards. And this is very important because these are different institutions. They're not where we work, but they are where we publish. So if they set some standard, we are obliged to that standard or we don't get to publish there. And most journals have, sorry, there's a typo, most journals have an ethics statement on their website. Interestingly, they are all quite different. And we'll get into some details. So there's not like one agreement among all journals or all major journals, so everyone has their own. If a paper is found to violate these ethical standards, it can be rejected at the time of referring, or it can be retracted after it's published. This is what a retracted paper looks like. I'll come back to this later. It's important to know that when a paper is retracted by the journal, it doesn't vanish from their website. It stays on their website with the word retracted stamped on it. So you cannot gamble that, well, if I get caught, they'll simply withdraw the paper and I won't have that paper. You still have the paper and you have this thing. However, one huge debate in the community is that the journal will never say whether it was retracted because of fraud, like plagiarism, or because of an error. You can also retract papers for an error. And journals don't say it and they'll refuse to say it. And the one-line answer why? It's fear of lawsuit. So because of fear of lawsuit, they'll get this far, but they'll never tell you the reason. That's very unfortunate because it discourages people from correcting their errors. Like a paper is completely wrong. Why not? It's possible to make a mistake, a big mistake, and your whole paper is wrong and can't be saved by rewriting it or anything. Then retract it, but unfortunately, you will have to live with this. Okay. Now, I mentioned some existing guidelines. So ICER's guideline, the Academy's guideline, I should have mentioned TIFR's. Actually, I don't like to say this, but they're all roughly the same because I wrote all of them. And actually, each time we, yeah, no. So we took permissions. I have written permission. So the Academy one has permission of the TIFR director to, no, the Academy came first, the old one. Then the TIFR one had permission of the Academy. Then the ICER one had permission of the Academy and TIFR. And finally, the revised Academy one has, anyway, so it is with permission. But it is copied, yes. So let me list for you some of the topics that are covered. You can, by the way, all these are available on the websites of these institutions, so you can freely download and read them. They are on the order of 6 or 7 pages, so not that long. So here is one of the sets of topics. Conduct of research involves publications, sharing of facilities, experiments involving human beings or animals, safety. Then under publications, authorship, plagiarism, responsibility of referees. I bet nobody's heard of this one before. But there is a responsibility. I was joking, but referees are anonymous and they're usually hated. And but they do have a responsibility, and it's good to set it down. And peer review in more generality beyond referring. So those are some of the topics. Here are some more. This is more relevant in a place like ICER, which has a big undergrad program. So teaching, assessment, then of course research supervision in all research institutes, ethical training to students. Then science administration. This is again a slightly hot potato. So bias and discrimination, ethics of recruitment and assessment, ethics in evaluating project grants and awards, policy issues. Conflict of interest, a very important one. Then a small section on the role of whistleblowers. Basically here, the whistleblower is somebody who reveals an ethical misconduct having taken place. It can be the person to whom it happened, or it could be just an observer. The problem is that often people feel they will be victimized if they report something. So there are also guidelines on how institutions have to treat whistleblowers. The point is whistleblowers could also be lying. It's both ways. And it has happened. It's not that it doesn't happen. So, there has to be some even-handed treatment of whistleblowers to see that they are protected from consequences, but also that they are punished in some way if they were lying, because they could have damaged the reputation of another person. Then there's ethics in technology-related issues. This also comes in medicine and so on. Okay, so that's the list of topics in those guidelines, just the list. And let me run you very briefly through a few of them, and then we'll get on to plagiarism, which is a big one. So these quotes are basically quotes from these guidelines. So no attempt must be made to fabricate or falsify data, even data that may be perceived to be of lower importance to the research outcome. So interestingly, we have come across cases, I've investigated one for a full year in a committee, where a particular piece of data was falsified in the sense it was copied from a previous paper where it was a measurement was taken on some chemical, but in this paper it was a different chemical, but the same plot or the same figure was just put. And the defense was, but this doesn't affect the outcome of this paper because it's about the controls for the experiment. But you know, anything that's in the paper is part of the paper. You can't really say that it doesn't affect the outcome, though that might affect the seriousness of the fraud. So there are degrees of seriousness, as we'll see. But so no attempt to fabricate or falsify data. I should say that there are people who, if they had seen this line or if they had had it printed in their office and all, would have been saved some really unpleasant experiences. Because somehow we don't talk about this, and people, when they are pressed and in a difficult situation, might fabricate or have fabricated and falsified results just to get out of that situation, but it's always been a bad mistake. Now, of course, one very legendary case was that of Jan Hendrik Schoen in Bell Labs. So he produced the most amazing results in his condensed matter laboratory, except that actually he wasn't doing anything in that laboratory and there were no results. Okay, it's quite a shocking case, and it shocked Bell Labs because how could somebody be doing research in their laboratory, but he wasn't actually doing anything. It wasn't that he was running there was some room where some equipment was, but the equipment wasn't even running, and he never had any readings, and he never had any lab notebooks, and he just kept writing papers, and they were stunning papers, and they were getting published because they were from Bell Labs. It was cyclical. You know, he used the reputation of Bell Labs, and Bell Labs sort of assumed that because they had hired him and he was very smart, so he must be doing something really good. So that can happen. And this is what Wikipedia says. He admitted to falsifying some data and stated he did so to show more convincing evidence for behavior that he actually observed. So here you see the kind of loop people can get in. He thought he claims that he had some real data, but it wasn't that convincing. So to make it convincing, he added some false data. First of all, this isn't the case, because he actually didn't have real data. But how can you make real data more convincing by adding false data? This is a logical puzzle, I think, for all scientists. Anyway, he was disgraced, he was sacked. He went back to Switzerland or Germany, I think Germany. And then they withdrew his degree, PhD, for this. And then he sued the university, and they won in some court, then they lost on appeal, then they won in the next court, a bit like Jayalalitha almost. And in the end, however, his degree was actually revoked. So it's a long story, and it cast a shadow on people, very good scientists who were his mentors and colleagues in Bell Labs, who had never done anything wrong, except that they never entered his lab to see what he was up to. Bertram Batlogg, very highly respected experimentalist, had to face all these unpleasant committees only because of what this guy does, but it was felt that Batlogg should have been more vigilant. Okay. Publication ethics will come later. Safety, of course, an obvious line. Research activity must not endanger people or the environment in any way. This becomes really relevant when you have more relevant when you have a lab. And so lab ethics is a whole subject, which I'm not going to discuss here, but let me mention here. So these are ethics and safety both are important aspects that cannot be addressed in this talk. And an institute which has laboratories, significant laboratories, will need such a talk by a person who actually is expert on this. Now, experiments involving human beings or animals require special attention, and there are guidelines and even laws on this. I'd just like to share with you that some student in ICER had the bright idea of doing an opinion poll on other students and asking their attitudes about social issues. And he was denied permission on the grounds that this had to go through the Human Ethics Committee, which didn't like the idea of one student, not as part of any academic work, but because he felt like, and he was living in a hostel, doing a survey on other students. And I have to say that actually in the end, it turned out that this particular student was suffering from severe problems, mental problems. And this episode was actually part of that. So it's a bit surprising, but you can't even do it was a questionnaire asking people, I don't know, what they thought about sexuality or something. This starts to get very intrusive. Of course, you could say that other students wouldn't have to answer, but basically we just didn't allow it. And I think that was the right decision. He could have done it with a faculty member from the HSS department if he had wanted. That he didn't want to do. Okay. Good. Now, this is the Government of India, which actually on this particular area has done a very good job of detailed guidelines. So there's this Committee for Purpose of Control and Supervision of Experiments on Animals, which will get you if you try to keep rats and slice up their brains, which a lot of my colleagues do. And the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. And then on stem cell and so on, there's the Indian Council of Medical Research. And each of these has a website and a very detailed documentation. And the procedure for doing these things, no matter which institute in India you're working in, it has to go through the procedure mandated by these bodies, which is only correct. By contrast, for example, plagiarism or other ethics, there is no central body which has any guidelines or rules to my knowledge. In the US, there is something called the Office of Research Integrity and so on. So that kind of thing doesn't exist in India yet. Okay, so let's go through some more random issues. This one may make you laugh. It's unethical to select candidates on extraneous considerations while rejecting others of higher quality, anywhere, anytime. Now it's very difficult because, what if I'm doing an interview for a physics faculty position and I want a condensed matter physicist because that's what I do. Now that I think, you can debate, but there could be a group which says this is what we are looking for, expertise in this area, should be in the advertisement. It should be out there before. You cannot really interview 20 people and then say, but actually we were always looking for a condensed matter physicist and so we reject 19 of the people, however good. That you cannot do. So this is in the academy guidelines, by the way. So it's enforceable on academy fellows who are actually, many of whom are directors of institutes. Okay. Bias and discrimination, this is a fairly catch-all thing which I think this one first appeared in the TIFR document and then it was ported to the other ones. And it's very clear there should not be any direct or indirect bias or discrimination against any individual based on any of these categories. Of course, there's also a statement about gender specifically. It was all mentioned in this, but discrimination against women in any form merits a special mention, and it's also the subject of committees that most institutes have which handle gender-related issues. And so what we did was we did put another line, which I don't have right now, below this, relating to women-related issues. But otherwise, other than that, it was left to the committees on women to look into those and make more detailed guidelines. I mean, one committee doesn't make all guidelines for all issues, and since that issue is very important and very significant, we felt that needs its own set of guidelines.
Yeah. So how does the first one does it not contradict reservation?
Good question. So, yeah, but then, yes, it does. Okay, so, yeah, so, okay, this line, of course, is too brief. One point is that you could advertise that it's a reserved post. Caste-based reservation is a form of affirmative action, and it's supposed to redress a social wrong. And so that is, again, a separate debate. It's actually a debate within the framework of lawmaking. And I think one doesn't, one tries to understand what the spirit of the law is. So in that sense, one has, so yeah, if you advertise a position which is a reserved position, then within that position, you apply this. You have to work within the law, and not just the law, but also the rules of the institution, because most research institutions or universities in India are under the government of India, and that requires these things. I'm not sure what private universities do, whether they even have these kind of things or not. Private companies don't have, so maybe private universities don't have to have. So this one again is a bit of a hot potato. So we have written that there should be no bias against hiring spouses in the same department. There are several departments I could name, but I'm not going to name, since some of them are in Bangalore, which actively tell couples that we are never going to hire both of you, however good you might be. And well, they fall foul of this law, and somebody should challenge them. Well, this is not a law, it's a guideline, but I think it's a guideline which, as far as we could make out, you always hear people say things like, but what if there's a couple and they always support each other in faculty meetings? But I've been in faculty meetings with lots of, I have two married couples in my department in ICER, there was one in TIFR. I mean, barely did they ever even share their opinions with each other in faculty. In a faculty meeting, you come and you just give your opinion, and you don't. On the other hand, there could be groups of cliques of people who are not married couples, but could be just for a clique which comes with a opinion, and they try to ram it through a meeting. So you can. Those are issues, but you cannot based on that do this. Also, of course, one has noticed that in almost all cases, the result of this is to not hire the wife. So that's and there are and there are many cases where it's unclear if you had to hire one, why it should be only the male partner. That's very unclear to me. I know concrete cases of that. Okay. Ethical training to students. So this one is from the academy document. It's pretty obvious. It's in a way, it's what we are doing now also. Now, conflict of interest. When an academy fellow is involved, so these two I've taken from the academy thing, but you could, I think these are roughly in some form also in the TIFR and ICER documents. The presence of a potential conflict of interest when you are interviewing, evaluating for position, award, grant, or fellowship must be brought to the attention of the relevant committee and or its chair. Now, I don't think we spelt out the conflict of interest, but one obvious one is the person being interviewed is your relative or close friend. Another one, not so obvious to people, is that you're in a national committee and it's your PhD student coming to get some award or fellowship. And I'm sorry to say I've sat in such committees and the member of the committee fights tooth and nail for their own student to get the award. And nobody knows what to say because the work done is jointly by that student and the person sitting with you in the committee. What are you supposed to say? I think the work wasn't that great. I mean, it's going to lead to a fight. And so we don't say people have to necessarily quit from the committee. They must reveal this, and then the chair can sort of take a decision. Many decent people I know have actually simply said, I'm going to sit outside for this one, or I'm not going to speak during this one. But I want to emphasize this must be repeatedly brought up to people before it happens, because in India, this one is a particularly bad one. It's kind of minor on the grand scale of things, but it's very annoying, and it does happen. Okay, then there's a section in this document, again also in TIFR and ICER documents, on how to actually handle the complaints. There has to be a very clear procedure. The head of the institution has to receive the complaint. There has to be an ethics committee. It has to meet or correspond with the complainant and the person against whom the complaint was made, and get the facts before making any further judgment, and it can take time. Okay, here's one that students like very much. Research supervisors should display the highest ethical standard when dealing with students. Conflicts between students and others in their group or between students and guides are not uncommon. Supervisors should be aware of the potential for this type of problems. So we've often seen that students get hurt because they are not made co-authors or they are not given proper credit as they feel. But the supervisor doesn't tell them in advance what it would take, what kind of achievement would get you co-authorship or this credit or first authorship or last, whatever it is. And so we recommend that troublesome issues should be identified and dealt with, but also, it's not here, that the lab or the group that's working together should have a statement, preferably in writing for labs, about how authorship and credit is granted. For labs, that can be imported. There can be 20 people working in one lab with one supervisor. Either everyone has to agree that the supervisor is absolutely right. That is this divine ethics that I mentioned in the beginning. But increasingly, people don't do that. Students are like, why is this right? So there has to be clarity, and the best way is for the advisor to make the picture clear. There will still be conflicts, but clarity beforehand, not when the conflict is happening, but beforehand, will help greatly. Okay, so So in this one, I think might be from ICER. So every PhD student has a thesis committee, which is the advisor and other faculty members, and they can mediate in these kind of issues, and they should be regularly monitoring the progress of the student. Sorry, this should be part of the same sentence. Okay, so so these are some, so now I come to publication ethics. So let's see, where am I in time? Halfway, I think. Okay. So, if there are any questions or comments at this stage. Okay, if not, I'll go on. So here is one that comes from the website of many journals. All listed authors of a publication should have contributed significantly to it. And it is wrong to exclude anyone who deserves to be an author. And equally, guest authorship, it's wrong for anyone who has not made a significant contribution to demand authorship. Equally, it's wrong to offer it. Okay, so in India, the standard statement is, well, the head of the lab doesn't do any work but gets his name on all the papers. Okay, now the problem is you have to know what are community standards in the field. And sorry, Subrat, part 5 of our lunch conversation. I think I gave the whole talk at lunch. What constitutes a significant contribution varies from subject to subject, and one has to be sensitive about differences. And personally, as a theoretical physicist, I was shocked when I found that if somebody makes difficult to make single crystal for experiments in condensed matter, and the case I am aware of involves niobium diselenide, which I don't think anyone in this room knows how to make, and I don't. But apparently, if you do, then you have the right to be a co-author whenever they use that crystal till the end of the crystal's life, not even the end of your life. And this is more or less agreed upon in the community, including from, we had to, in particular investigation, we had to ask people in Cambridge University or Princeton or wherever, or Stanford, you name it. And there was a general agreement that that's how it is in that field. And yes, I mean, it looks a bit, surprising because this crystal grower doesn't, I mean, it's only one example, by the way. In biology, you might offer a particular mouse, genetically modified mouse, and you made the mouse, and then anything on that mouse's brain is you're a co-author. So that, then questions come up like, well, the experiment couldn't have been done without that crystal. Then somebody will answer yes, and it couldn't have been done without tea being served every 2 hours. So what about the person who served tea? So these arguments keep raging. But it's important, you can't go to people who do research in superconductivity and say, we string theorists think that you should now stop doing whatever you're doing in your way and you have to do it. They are not going to listen, simply. And it's not that ethics is just what looks obvious to you. So you have to be very sensitive about different practices in different communities. You may know that in some journals, in condensed matter especially, the individual contribution of each author has to be mentioned on the first page. So it will say, authors so-and-so, X made the crystal, Y did the spectroscopy, Z did the theoretical calculation, whatever, or in some combination. That helps a bit. All journals don't do it.
Nature.
Huh?
Nature has.
Nature has this, I think, now, yes. But these are all recent developments in the last few years. and for obvious reasons. There have been a lot of disputes. Okay, here's an interesting one. Ghost authorship is where I do the work, but I don't want to appear as an author because my work shows that tobacco smoking is good for you, and I happen to be the owner of a tobacco company or working for a tobacco company. So I would much rather that the work, I don't care that my research, I don't get credit for my research because I'm making money from my cigarettes. But I would like somebody else who looks very neutral and independent and doesn't have any visible connection to the company to be the author. So that's called ghost authorship. Here it is. So if the company has an interest in the outcome, it may often go with ghost authorship of its own sponsored research. Okay. Now, this is an interesting graphic. This is the rate of retraction of published papers. Now, I can't tell you what, you can sort of see that quality, whatever the sample and whatever the sample size and whether this covers physics and chemistry and biology or not, something going on here. And something went on here between 2001 and 2009. And I think mostly what happened is the internet. This is the period when the internet became, it started around here for most people, and then its importance grew exponentially. And once that's there, you can much more easily find out what's fabricated, what is plagiarized, what is person publishing two different papers which are the same paper in two journals to boost their total. And even you can find honest errors more easily because now you can in a targeted way read all papers in areas where you are an expert. And before you might or you might not, but now you definitely can. So this bunch are misconduct, this bunch are honest error, and you see that the misconduct retractions tend to outnumber the honest error. This is a bunch of irreproducible results. It sounds like a joke. But this other, I haven't figured out what it means. So how it can be none of these, I'm not really sure. Or maybe these others are where the authors withdrew and declined to give a reason. No, authors could say honest error. I don't know what that is. But you can see that this is a huge increase in retractions. And these are some of the famous journals, Nature, Cell, Science, PNAS, and so on. And the blue are the retractions in the first half of 2000 to 2010 and red in the second half. So typically, red has gone up, especially in this bunch of journals. In Nature, it's almost the same in both half decades. Okay. Now, journals are, can journals decide that they don't feel like investigating your complaint? Supposing you write to a journal saying, so-and-so's paper, this paper is plagiarized. Can they decide, okay, too bad? It'll make the journal look bad if we investigate, so we won't. So that probably used to happen. But now, again, under the glare of internet, it's very difficult. So they have this duty, and it's stated in ethics guidelines. And if there's a minor infraction, then the journal can ask the authors to put in a correction or an apology. For more major violations, the paper is retracted. By the way, any time after the paper is published, you can always put, people think unless I put in a correction next month, it's not worth it. 10 years later, you can publish a erratum or an apology for something. You can, and sometimes you can be found out and forced to do that 10 years later. It has happened. And as I told you, when it's retracted, it doesn't vanish. It remains on the website with the stamp of retraction. Now, I mentioned this thing about distinction between honest mistakes and misconduct. So here I'm quoting from a website called Retraction Watch. The Retraction Watch is very entertaining. It keeps a track of all retractions in the literature, in the scientific literature. And tells you also the gossip around it. I don't know if they get sued or not, but they always tell you what the likely reason is. And they highlighted the case of Derek Stein from Brown University. He said he retracted a paper in PRL when he found that a key part of the analysis had been performed incorrectly, and his thoroughness and speed of retracting within 4 months of publication was singled out for praise on Retraction Watch. He was seen as having done something really very honest and very heroic in a way, because, you know, the default option is sit tight, it's still in PRL, it will still be on your CV, and it shouldn't be because it's really a wrong paper. And this is very important that, you know, if it's wrong, the author should withdraw it. Okay, so plagiarism. So this is the definition: practice of taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off as one's own. It can involve unattributed lifting of textual material or ideas or research results. It can also involve incorporation of some ideas or results of others without proper attribution. And this is a very, very subtle issue and requires a lot of experience and training to sort of see how it plays out. So I'll show you some examples. So first, some quotes. This is what T.S. Eliot had to say on this: immature poets imitate, mature poets steal. And there was this wacky British guy called Joad who said appropriate remarks are meant to be appropriated, and originality is little more than skill in concealing origins. By the way, there's a quote attributed to Einstein. Turns out it's a fake attribution. He never said it. The secret of success is knowing how to hide your sources. But it's also true that Einstein, in his paper in 1905 on special relativity, did not mention Lorentz, though he almost certainly knew the work of Lorentz. So, you know. And here are some pictures which also bring up the question of what is this plagiarism or parody or something else. So for those who know French, this is an obscene phrase. Yeah, so this is Marcel Duchamp, and this one I'm not sure who it is. But, you know, you can call them tributes. You wouldn't call it plagiarism. Nobody's going to think this is the original by, Da Vinci. That's not going to happen. So probably there's some argument that, well, if it's not going to fool people into thinking that it's your work, then it's not plagiarism. The most famous artwork on the planet, and you do something clever and make people laugh, that's not obviously plagiarism. But you never know. I mean, you know, if Da Vinci were alive and he sued, I don't know how it would go. You cannot tell. Okay. Now, this person wrote a nice little article, and I think she later started an institute which sort of examines these issues. Many people think we know it when we see it is a good definition of plagiarism. By the way, this is also supposed to be a good definition of pornography. I don't know if you know the famous trial, or the famous judge who said that. But anyway, so this person, Teddy Fishman, wrote down a bunch of things that, you know, you need to go through somehow, all of them. So it should use words, ideas, or work products that are attributable to another identifiable person or source without attributing the work to the source in a situation where there is a legitimate expectation of original authorship. Okay, so for example, I don't know, if you're writing a review article, all your ideas are from other papers. It could be some your own, some of other people. So to some extent, the fact that it's a review article, it doesn't let you off if you copy words and phrases wholesale, but at least it lets you off from the idea that you used other people's ideas, because this is a review article. But if it's an original paper, it's different. And of course, very nice line, in order to obtain some benefit, credit, or gain, which need not be monetary, because in academia, things like promotions and power, and they may translate into money or they may not, but, you know, often we work for rewards which are not necessarily money. Okay. Now, this website, authenticate.com, has this, so there are many softwares now which can read a thesis or an article and go check on the net, and Turnitin is one. Authenticate, I think, is another different one. And, yeah.
Yeah, no, in the previous thing, when this legitimate expectation, and it's sort of like this Mona Lisa thing, you don't refer to Einstein.
Quite, exactly.
Many things.
That's right.
More recently, also something which is maybe, then it becomes a little gray.
It is always gray. It's always gray, but the community indeed never bothers to cite Einstein for everything, otherwise we would have...
But then it could happen that there's something 10 years ago which someone may think is common knowledge, so you don't need to sign, but the author may feel that it may need to be.
No, so this is, it's a never-ending, this subject, cannot be just it's never, you're never safe. You can never sit back and say, now nobody can sue me. For that matter, that's true in general life. Anybody can sue you for pretty much anything. So, that's just a fact.
But there's no way to, there's that legitimate expectation, there's no more sharper quantification.
Well, this I think is the best short 5-line summary of this thing. Of course, different university websites and so on have more detail. So I'm actually going to run through some detail from this Authenticate. So they've identified, sorry for the font being a bit small, a bunch of types of plagiarism, and this axis is more common and this axis is more serious. So, and I'll just go through these briefly. So this is their, just their opinion. Again, there's no universal authority. It's a private website and this is what they think. So for example, invalid source is relatively low on more serious. Duplication, but they are high on being more common. Complete plagiarism, which means my paper is really a copy. This has happened, not with my paper, the case that Rajesh told you about. So that is relatively rare, but it's, of course, one of the most serious. Okay. So secondary source is that you use a secondary source but cite the primary source. So let's say I use your paper of 2 years ago, but I cite Einstein or somebody who did something before so it looks like my work is a development on something 10 years ago, but your work which came in between, I don't cite. So that is called secondary source. So somebody may say, well, I cited something, the germ of the idea, but you didn't cite the developments which were important for your work. So that's secondary source. That's very common. Invalid source is sort of obvious, but it could be sloppy or it could be intentional. You cite a source which people won't find when they click on it, and then they'll be too lazy to follow it up and they'll just not bother. But in this way, you have deflected the majority of people from going to that source because you purposely gave some wrong link or something. Can be done. Duplication, so you reuse your previous work without attribution. It says the ethics of duplication is highly debated. Yes? That's what is a secondary source. Secondary source is when I refer to the original work and not the in-between work. Huh?
I really look at the original work. I didn't look at the beginning work.
Well, that depends on the relevance of the in-between work to your work. You cannot say for sure that something is in between the original work and yours, but if what you actually did uses the in-between work's result, whether you used it actively or you learnt about it later, but it's before you and it's after the original source, and if it's relevant, you have to mention. If it's not relevant, then you say it's not relevant. So how relevant is something to your work, that ethics document cannot tell you. Yeah, it still becomes your fault, but if you didn't look at it, it's an honest omission, which is very common. There's nobody in this room who hasn't made honest omissions. Just correct it if somebody points it out. We always live with a little bit of ethical ambiguity, and it's not, you'll be paralyzed if you try to do everything all the time. So, but certainly if you deliberately leave out the thing that was epsilon behind, onto which you added epsilon, and cite some older work, it makes it look like you added much more than epsilon, while you really added epsilon in that direction.
Does that show some actual statistics of happening in the work?
So according to this website, these numbers given here are, the yellow bar is commonness and the other yellow bar in this is seriousness. So secondary source, they rate 6.9 out of 10 commonness and 6.4 on seriousness. This is just their opinion. Commonness might be based on some survey, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, simultaneous, so I always get asked this question. So, there is a general agreement in many scientific communities, but not all, that if the work is simultaneous, then you simply quote the other, they quote you, you agree, it's all friendly, and everybody says that this work was done independently. In mathematics, I'm told, if you're trying to prove a theorem and somebody proved that theorem yesterday, then you're in a lot of trouble. In mathematics, they tend not to accept that two things are done simultaneously. But in physics, theoretical physics, it happens all the time. Actually, you can almost not think of any major advance that didn't happen. I mean, maybe Maldasena's ADS-CFT paper is a rare example of one paper, which incidentally he published in 2 different places, but let's not get into that. So did Witten once publish a paper in 2 different places, and by mistake he forgot, actually. Anyway, this happens. But after that, for example, Gubser, Klebanov, Polyakov, and Witten are 2 separate papers, and they're always cited together. And that's because, something was going on, both groups thought about it, both groups wrote papers. So it's best if you know of something independently to yours to write to that person and contact and try to do it in a friendly way. But sometimes people can be very nasty. So
sometimes also there is a tendency that people cite, because earlier papers had cited some paper.
Yes.
Also cite
Yes, very true.
Paper, right? Very true. I think sometimes we just cite the wrong paper, completely irrelevant.
I'll give you an interesting example. Supersymmetry, when it was first proposed in the 70s, was a thing done by a very small group of people. Till Witten in 1981 wrote a very famous paper called Constraints on Supersymmetry Breaking and Dynamical Breaking of Supersymmetry. And in that, he did a paper by these Russian authors. I know this paper because I had also studied it as part of my thesis work, Wolfman and Lichtman. But for whatever reason, Witten made a typo, and the name came out like this. And if you look now, this paper, which doesn't exist and with this typo, has literally hundreds, if not thousands of citations. Nobody has gone to it. This paper is hard to find in the first place, and nobody bothered. And they just took the typo from Witten's paper, and it has propagated for 35 years. Still propagating, actually. So it happens. Okay, invalid source, they say, is not so common, but it's serious if it's purposeful. You purposely give a wrong source to deceive people so that they can't access that paper. Duplication, yes. Then paraphrasing. Okay, now paraphrasing is a subject of enormous debate. Here he says, paraphrasing is taking another person's writing and changing the words, making it appear that an idea or piece of research is original when it came from an uncited outside source. Now here is a very tricky thing. We often have to describe what another person did, and we can't have lots of quotes and their words all over our paper. It looks very odd. So we have to paraphrase. And most universities, and I'll show you what MIT has, have guidelines on what is acceptable paraphrase and unacceptable paraphrase. So it would not be appropriate to say that just paraphrasing is wrong, but here they are implying that it comes from an uncited source. So you still need to cite the source even if you paraphrase, so I'll show you that. Okay, repetitive research. Similar methodology in a new study without proper attribution. Somebody did something for sodium, I do it for potassium, and I don't cite their thing, it's the same thing. Or I do it for sodium and then potassium and so on. That does happen. Replication is submission of a paper to multiple publications, resulting in the same manuscript being published more than once. Then misleading attribution is inaccurate list of authors who contributed to a manuscript. So this is not really under plagiarism. Is this a list of plagiarism? Research ethics, plagiarism and attribution, they've combined them. So misleading attribution, this is authorship issue which I discussed. Unethical collaboration, don't cite the collaborative nature of the study, violate some code of conduct. Verbatim plagiarism, I told you, this is copy-paste, I'll show you an example. And of course, complete plagiarism, take a whole manuscript and simply resubmit it under your own name. Okay. So a famous case in India dating from 2001 when it was caught, it had been happening in the 90s. involved the Vice-Chancellor of Kumaon University. And here is the, so one of the way when I found out about this was to take text from the original paper published much earlier by Renata Kalosh in Stanford and the copied text and just open a Word file or some file and place it side by side. That usually convinces people much more than just talking about it. And most people don't do this, by the way. So now you can see what's happened, okay? This is Kalosh, this is this Vice-Chancellor, Rajput. And you can, in particular, one could have guessed, here it starts with one could have guessed, but the blue is otherwise exactly the same. Now, the point is that 13, as I recall, was not a citation of this to this paper, but even if it was, it's still not okay, because these quotes are my quotes for this talk. These are not their quotes. The authors didn't put this in quotes. In fact, they removed this in particular. So, they technically should have said ... and then open quotes and quoted that, as Kalosh said, and they didn't do any of that. And I don't even think 13 is a reference to her paper. Okay, then look at equations. So, well, there's very little to argue once you see the equations. In fact, as far as I remember, they didn't quote her paper at all. So, yeah, there you have it. And, this case ran a very rocky, trajectory. So, that's a sad story, which I really don't want to dwell on. But I just want to say that, establishments all over India, including the governor of the state in which Kumaon University was located, which was called at the time, Uttarakhand or Uttaranchal or is it? The governor was Surjit Singh Barnala, who passed away a couple of weeks ago, and who actually gave a press statement saying some academics in TIFR who were jealous of this vice-chancellor had created a lot of false misinformation about him and were trying to damage the interest of the university. And that is really, really shameful, and I think should not be forgotten. The way the issue finally got highlighted is that several Nobel laureates, I have a copy, their letter is available on the net, by the way, in Stanford University, including Osheroff, and also some non-Nobel laureates known to us like Steve Schenker, Lenny Susskind, and so on, signed a letter to the President of India, Abdul Kalam. And once that letter reached him, he actually asked for an investigation. And I'm told by people who were on the investigation that when they showed this to the High Court judge who was leading he said, I'm not a scientist, please help me. There were some scientists on the committee. They showed him this kind of thing and this kind of thing, and he was like, come on, it's obvious. Anybody who is willing to, now if you really don't want to believe it, I suppose you could say, well, the different number of words in each line, but it is obvious. So India did not come off very well, but in the end, that person was made, he resigned, he was not sacked. And academies started to get worried about the issue. That was the one positive fallout. So the Academies Committee on Scientific Values came about directly after this. Okay, but this is much more common. And this is what, people here are not going to, I think, do that, at least until you become a vice-chancellor. But this, you are likely to do. Everyone is likely to do. You just don't know when it will happen to you. So here's a true story. In the introduction, the authors copy and paste about 1 page of material from an older paper by other authors. They cite that original paper at the start of their paper, but not near the part where they have copied it. The copy is verbatim. Now, their main scientific results of this new paper are not stolen. Actually, it's a good paper. The only thing, a good paper in the sense, it's good research. It's valid, good, original research. Only background material is taken, and their defense is that it's mostly standard information. In fact, they actually said that this information follows from Maxwell's equations and that nobody has a copyright on Maxwell's equations. And actually, that was the bad thing they did, because until this happened, so there were many authors, it turned out somebody had been asked to draft the paper, that person didn't know what is okay to paraphrase and not, and had the original paper, and maybe their English was not so good, so they copied that. But when it was pointed out, the senior authors tried to hide behind this. But then, So it is still plagiarism. They tried to hide behind this and also said that, look, we cited the original paper, so we are never trying to hide that source. But look at what they actually had. So this is the original, this is the plagiarized paper. And, you know, it cannot be that this is not copied. Although here you may still wonder, I agree that these are very simple things from Maxwell's equations. So up to here you may have some doubt. But now go on to this, and now it becomes very hard. You know, where theta is the angle between the fast axis of the quarter wave plate and the optic axis of the birefringent material. Just drop a few words and you get this sentence. So this is unacceptable plagiarism. One amusing sidelight from this story is that the formula 3 is actually got a typo. Can you spot the typo? This kind of thing can happen when you copy. The coefficient of I vector and j vector is the same with just a change of sign. Here it is cos phi cos theta, but here it's supposed to be cos phi sin theta. These are two independent things. And here they just had the same thing, complex conjugated, which is totally wrong. I had the pleasure of pointing this error out to the authors who had not noticed. But it shows what can happen when you copy something, because, you know, if you have this in front of you, then your eyes, when you finish this line, your eyes may go up there and you may just transcribe that, and that's what happened. Also, you're not understanding. If you're writing this, you're not understanding what you're supposed to be doing at that moment. So this was clear plagiarism. This whole paragraph, look at it. Okay, now what's probably scares people is, well, can I never write a paper again? Will I always be in trouble? What will happen to me? So we can use other people's results. We all do with proper attribution. We can quote it or we can paraphrase it, but we have to learn how to paraphrase. So here's something from MIT, their Research Integrity Office. I hope you can read it. So here's an original. We are not going to entertain a discussion on whether this is true or false, by the way. Because of their unique perspective, Americans fear globalization less than anyone else. And as a consequence, they think about it less than anyone else. When Americans do think about globalization, they think of the global economy as an enlarged version of the American economy. It's actually very funny. It's positively hilarious. Okay, now this is by Lester Thurow. And this one, MIT claim, calls it plagiarism. According to Lester Thurow, you have mentioned him, Americans fear globalization less than people from other countries, and as a consequence, spend less time thinking about it. Notice these three-word phrases: as a consequence, fear globalization less, thinking about it, as an enlarged version. So even this, which you think may be okay, isn't acceptable in MIT. Because exact words have been used without quotes, and things in between have been substituted, and this would be considered plagiarism. So it's not plagiarism. This one, Lester Thurow maintains that because Americans see globalization simply as a bigger form of their own economy, they're less concerned about it than is the rest of the world. The importance of this paragraph is, it's your flow of thoughts that would result after you have read that. And typically, you will produce this if you read that and put it away. And spend at least 1 minute thinking what you were saying. But if you have this open on the left of your computer and you're typing, then you're likely to produce this. So the best way to produce a good paraphrase, acceptable paraphrase, read, digest, and then write it as so-and-so has said that, whatever. But typically, you won't copy words and you won't write it in the same order. Notice that this is a long paragraph. This is a very good summary which says essentially the same thing. And after all, the original author may have some interest in writing long paragraphs, he's expounding a new thought. You want to summarize it and get on to your thought, so it's better for you to write it in short form. So there are many, this is very instructive, and there's a whole handbook at integrity.mit.edu. Okay, now back to the discussion with Subrat. So, figures. What do you do when you're writing a paper and you want a figure and it's in somebody else's paper? So in principle, if the data are protected by copyright, you have to ask permission to use them. You may have to pay to use it. You cannot make a science video and use your favorite rock song as the soundtrack. Okay, it's not legal. Now, here there's a clear distinction between law and ethics. You might not see why the person who wrote the song should have a right now, 30 years later, 20 years later, to, you use half a minute of the song, why shouldn't you be allowed? So there's a very gray area here. And this is a very favorite area of litigation, of course. You may know that George Harrison famously lost a case about the song My Sweet Lord because it was copied, the chorus is copied from a soul group of about 10 years earlier, I think the Shondells or something, and it was called He's So Fine, and the choruses sound similar, the rest of the song is quite different. And the judge eventually ruled that on one hand he believed that Harrison had not consciously plagiarized, but at the same time Harrison had used that song because he had heard it and it was playing in his mind, and so he had to pay damages. So in some sense the judge said, look, I don't hold it against you, but please pay up. Which often happens, by the way, to very rich people. Now, those of you who know Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin also had to face a suit like that, but they won. Because it was only the intro, and so there's a raging debate on YouTube. You can go and look it up yourself. So it's tricky. Anyway, now, this I got from Wikipedia. So Subrat was asking me if it's an American law. So this is what Wikipedia actually said when I made this. I don't know what it says today. Is a doctrine in US copyright law that allows limited use of copyrighted material without acquiring permission. So if you do feel like using a figure or a piece of a song or something, you can go ahead and prepare yourself that if you get a complaint, then you say, well, I used it under fair use, but if you say I can't, then I won't, and I'll remove it. So there's like a threat hanging over you, but you will not be jailed or punished for that. You can say that this is my interpretation of fair use, and you can argue up to a point. And usually what happens in litigation is that unless you are a serial offender, they are going to let you go. Even the few people who have been actually arrested for downloading torrents were people who are downloading not gigabytes, but terabytes of torrents. One torrent or two a week. I'm just saying, I'm not telling you what to do. It is, yeah? Is it? Is it really? Oh my God. Okay. Yes.
So supposing you're giving a talk and you download some pictures from the internet and put it in your talk.
Yeah, as I've done. Oh, this is from the internet.
So that's right.
Good. So here, what I do when I give talks, as far as possible, I try to look for pictures which are on a Wikipedia Creative Commons page. That means they have a Creative Commons license, which allows me to use it as long, and doesn't even require me to necessarily, there are different levels of license. I don't even have to credit the original user. The only thing is I can't claim that it's mine. If I claim that it's so, if I didn't put Wikipedia here, I might be okay. But if I wrote Sunil Mukhi here and said I designed the picture, that would be not okay. So this gives you a fair amount of leeway, and most of the time you can get away with this. So it provides for legal non-licensed citation or incorporation of copyrighted material in another author's work. So there is some hope. Now there's a whole other story when it comes to things like photocopying, and Subrat should tell you about this because there was a famous case in the Delhi High Court, right? On Delhi University issues where actually it was recommended to students to photocopy a full book, and they were doing it at the photocopy guy off campus, and there was a case by the publisher, but the publisher lost. It's very interesting. I don't understand the details of the case, and it's a bit surprising to me, the conclusion, but the court had some principles in its mind, and anyway, students were beneficiaries. Well, yeah, I think, yeah.
In that case, it was not the whole book. It was reading material. There were chapters from several books.
I guess the problem is,
together
yeah, okay, okay.
Sold by the photocopying person.
I see. But the issue then is that, if that's going to be done for hundreds and thousands of students over years and years, because I think fair use stands because it may be a loss to you that somebody didn't pay you for your figure, but it's not much of a loss. Now, you can debate whether you have the moral right. This copyright is a legal thing. It's not it's not strictly, it just overlaps with ethics. I can argue that, you may have drawn the figure, but you're a human being and all human beings have a shared life and you have to share your figure. And that's my view of society. I may not believe in private property, I don't know. But this allows minor violations, is my opinion. But the court seems to have allowed something a little more major than that because all students were doing it. Yeah. Yeah, but Suvrat, not being able to afford is a bit of a minefield. No, I can't afford a car. Can I just take yours? I mean, there is an issue there. Turns out it's legally okay. I'm just a bit surprised. Yeah.
And here it was a little bit because if an instructor says that you should read from 10 different books, one chapter each, it is probably a little unreasonable just for reading one chapter to expect the student to buy the whole book.
That may be also true.
Or 10 books, I mean. So I think there were such ingredients in this particular case.
Well, you could think that there's a burden on the instructor to write their notes and but anyway, I don't want to get into, yeah. Now you're talking. Absolutely. Absolutely. So now you're getting into the ethics of publishers, or as Paul Ginsberg famously called Elsevier, is a video, the evil empire. And he did this at Strings 97, which was partly funded by Elsevier, and they were there. So this was quite a remarkable historic event. So yeah, the question of whether publicly funded people can really write a book and hold copyright to it when they're writing it sitting in their office of ICTS or TIFR, that's a very important ethical question. That's an ethical policy making question. Yes. Okay, good. So I should conclude now. Just 2 minutes more. I think I'm way over time. So I want to emphasize that for our establishment to be internationally credible, all scientific institutions in India need to have a precise and a professional ethical process. And this slide is something I showed to the Indian Academy of Sciences a couple of months ago at their meeting. All institutions should have a detailed institutional code of ethics, which should be on their website. They should have a committee to sensitize members about ethical considerations, and they should have a credible investigation procedure for complaints. And sometimes institutes think this is the only thing the committee is for, but I think the middle thing is very important because, prevention is more important than cure, and most academics are not actually criminals. So there's no point going straight to this stage before you have done this extensively in your institute. This is also probably the reason for this talk here and having more such talks in every institute. However, it's really quite sad, go to IIT websites or any Delhi University or anything, either you won't find any code of ethics or you'll find something very shady called a code of conduct. It basically says you shall not be rude to the Vice-Chancellor, you shall stand at attention for the national, I mean that's a code of conduct, but that's not a code of ethics, that's just bullshit which they have put up on their website. Okay, now in the US, the NSF has a beautiful statement. I really like this. The director, this is of NSF, shall require that each institute applying for financial assistance from NSF describe in its grant proposal a plan to provide training and oversight in responsible and ethical conduct of research to undergrads, graduate students, postdoctoral researchers participating. Why not faculty? Now I'm mystified. Not faculty. Maybe postdoctoral is everyone else. Okay. So it's a requirement. Now, DST, DBT, CSIR don't have this in their thing. Some people argue that this will be just one more bureaucratic stumbling block to get anything done, or people will write some nonsense and submit it. That may be true. But I like the fact that you apply for research funds, you'll get research funds, but please explain how you're going to do your research ethically. What's wrong with that? It's accountability of kind. Okay. One thing that the guidelines emphasize, and which is uncomfortable for students, everyone is responsible for their own conduct. You can't say my advisor told me to plagiarize, so I did it, so it's not my fault. That's not okay. Now, students do get in a bind. Should I report? Should I leave this supervisor, go to another one? What should I do? It's difficult, but nobody said life is easy. It's difficult, so it's difficult. You have to do something. You can always talk with the ethics committee if there is one. You can talk with the director if it's not the director who is doing this in the first place. Okay. But it's very important to realize you can compromise a lifetime of good work by a single unethical act. Nobody will believe you ever again. Simple as that. Okay. As far as reporting, if you know about a case, you are obliged to report it. And take suitable action. And I emphasize this, calibrated. It should not be some knee-jerk thing that, oh, we caught this person, chuck him out. It could be anything from a warning to a fine, or to whatever the institute thinks, or even a statement of censure which is circulated in the institute, or whatever. But it should be calibrated according to the extent of the wrongdoing. False claims, of course, of misconduct are unethical. That's obvious, and that's all I have to say. Thank you. Okay. Why should it not be allowed? Okay. So the first question, of course, I don't know the answer, but people feel that the publisher takes far. It's not just the publisher. A book, paper book, has things like distribution costs. They are costs. They're pretty serious costs. Actually, it has to be printed on paper, bound, cost of ink, cost of binding, publicity, huh? Yeah. So, well, if you scan the book and send some money to the author, then you might be doing the ethical thing, but that's not, there's no obvious way to do that. I mean, the point is the author has written the book, right? Now, the question comes down that when you write a book, do you have the right to be paid by every person who reads the book, yes or no? It's as simple as that. And if the answer is no, which some people might think, or something in between, I don't know what different people's answer is, but at some level, when you do something, you have a right to be paid for it. I mean, otherwise, you're doing a PhD or you're a faculty member, why should you be paid for that? Questions? No. So, the book, okay. Yes, I agree. But, yeah, I really don't know how to answer. First of all, everybody who writes a book is not an academic who's already being paid. Think of an author of novels who sits at home and writes novels and doesn't have any other job. What should be done for them? Should they be paid? But now if their book is scanned and on the net and you download it, then you are reading it without paying them. Their sales will go down, right?
It's like entertainment and scientific.
Oh, you should pay for entertainment but not scientific ideas. Oh, that's a tricky one. Yeah. Yes, that argument is well made, and I think most people agree. I agree.
And why should the journal ask for $20 for your
Well, it is it's refereed. You have to.
Changing also now. I mean, at least in many of our fields.
Huh? Well, the whole process of a journal, even a purely electronic journal, does have some costs. You can't say it has no costs. So, no, but that's not refereed. So that is the difference. You can read, the journal's argument is you please read it from the archive, and then it's not refereed and you can read it. We are not stopping you. Some fields, yeah, and the answer is whenever money is involved, which is not the case for what most of us do, fortunately. Yeah, I know.
So, but that's why now there is more and more these laws that anything which is publicly funded research, there is an obligation to make it
open access
available, and there is all these sort of guidelines now. Yeah. So
I think there's scope for a whole talk on open access. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I think, Sci-Hub is one thing, but I think it's good to have a talk on open access, the concept, and what changing rules, as he said, laws have been changing, and institutions have been changing. Europe, for example, has some very strong laws on open access. For European government-funded research, the laws are very strict. I think in the US, I think they're not so strict. Yeah.
How many pages in my thesis should be original in my own thought and how many others?
You mean in terms of thought?
Yes, I mean your own work and how many can be
Maybe a more interesting version is many people cut and paste their own papers and write their thesis. Is that is that legitimate or not? Is maybe if you're cutting and pasting, then in your thesis, I think everything that he said from others, then everything that he said applies. But
if it's your own,
about
your own published
your
papers,
own publications.
What are plagiarism in thesis? So is it considered wrong just by seeing how many pages you copy from others?
See, no. I think there are two things not to be mixed up here. One is whether your thesis is any good as a piece of original scientific work that you will be given a PhD. That is the academic committee which evaluates your thesis, and supervisor has to judge that. The other is whether your thesis misleadingly suggests that you did any of the work which actually was done by other people. So your thesis could be perfectly not misleading. It could be a beautiful review of the subject to which you have contributed only very little, almost nothing. It may be therefore judged not worth a PhD, but a very nice review article. To get a PhD, you should have some percentage of original research. That is up to your fee in your field, your advisor, your community will advise. That's why different universities have different standards. Those which have high standards have more original PhD thesis.
Not a review article for PhD.
A purely review article should not get you a PhD. But it could, for example, give you a master's thesis. And general consensus is that master's thesis may or may not have original work. If it doesn't, it should be stated as a review article, but can be very useful also. Yeah.
Does it really require to have a paper to get PhD?
A published paper, that depends on the field also. But original work, I think that's not negotiable, is it? Some original research. PhD does imply original research in all fields.
No, I'm talking about the subject.
This issue that Rajesh has brought up, whether it's okay to basically bunch together your papers as a thesis.
Yeah.
Is that acceptable?
Yeah, I think I don't see anything wrong with that. There's no, you can say that this chapter is from this paper. You're not depriving anybody of anything.
You say that this is material from...
Nobody should think that you wrote those papers and you wrote a thesis and that together they add up to double of your work. It should be clear in the thesis that your papers are also the thesis.
Yeah, but sometimes those papers are published. You have to take permission.
So that's a question now. It never used to be a question when I was doing my PhD. So we just pasted the whole paper. Or actually in those days we had to retype the whole paper. There was no other way to do it.
So on the same lines, this MIT standard for
paraphrasing. Yeah, yes.
Does it apply to my own work? Previous.
Your own previous work. So, definitely, this one, there's a lot of debate. I've seen papers where the whole first page, so let's say a person writes 2 papers with 2 different proteins, everything else is the same, method is the same. Page 1 is the same, page 2 has different figures. This is an honest paper, but they didn't bother to rewrite the whole paper. They do that. It's not, doesn't seem nice to me, but know how different communities react to that.
Yeah, they now come with this thing, right? Contains substantial
text overlap, yes.
By the own authors. Or
by other authors. That's a very damn,
But by own authors, it's, I think, an implicit sort of judgment on the...
It's a judgment on the fact that you didn't, didn't paraphrase it properly. Yeah. And by the way, the archive saying substantial overlap of text with other authors has led to recently somebody being investigated by a university. So as soon as the archive says this, if your colleague in the next office who hates your guts will go to your head of department, and it's enough grounds to open an investigation, and in this case it was pretty serious for that person. So don't ever get the archive.
The archive has an automatic engine which sort of matches this thing. So anything you submit to the archive, they won't let you know unless, I think, right? I mean, I don't know, what is the procedure there?
What?
That if there is substantial, they won't warn you or anything.
I don't
They'll
know,
just come
yeah, maybe.
directly with the...
Hasn't happened to me yet, despite my reputation. But yeah.
But I suppose that it will, and I don't even know what their guidelines are for substantial. Is that made clear on the archive?
Well, the only obvious thing is they must have been written by Tanmay.
There's a page which says substantial.
I think it's fair to say that the algorithm will not catch you for paraphrasing some work or using some standard words. It really wants sentence matches of or phrase matches of a kind which cannot occur if you are not looking at the source. This is very important. Yeah.
So this discussion we are having in 2017.
Yeah.
Like you said, when you were in register,
Yeah.
you could copy again
Yes.
your thesis.
Yes.
30 years later, we have different codes of ethics,
Yes.
different journals bringing up different things.
Yes.
What do you do what you did 30 years ago? So that's unethical right now.
Yeah.
What you did in 1967.
Yeah.
So what are we?
I don't know. Princeton University didn't allow women to be faculty members in some year. Nobody is saying Princeton should be closed down today because they did that. We're saying, okay, that was what they did then, but now they can't do it. There are many things there are many barbaric things or bizarre things that used to happen. And, ethics cannot be retroactive. It's a statement of what the community thinks today. I think women's issues is a very good example. It just never used to be discussed 20 years ago, not because there weren't women scientists, just because they were constantly being done out of a fair deal and not given the jobs they deserved. The cases are emerging day after day after day. Emmy Noether herself, right? And this other one, mathematician, who had a much worse time, Kovalevskaya, yes. Had a really, they're just incredible how much, and of course, Rosalind Franklin, and so many cases. So, that's what ethics was like then. Now, it doesn't mean that our forefathers were much more evil than us or we are much less evil than them. Society had not become enlightened about certain things, and now it has. And it will become more so in the future, we hope. The same is true about law, by the way. Another example, in the United States, a black and white person could not legally marry. Against the law. It was against the law till the 60s in some states. What do you do? That's what it was. But it's not there now and cannot be accepted now. Yeah. You're saying it may come back. Yeah, I know.
Any other questions? Otherwise, let's thank Sunil again.